You know, this paradox, it really cuts to the very heart of what we're talking about today. See, all around us, in our social landscape, there's this silent war being waged. It's not with words, but with bodies, with posture, with the very space we take up. It's a battle for dominance that honestly, most of us are fighting without even realizing it. And understanding this war, really seeing the architecture behind it, that's the key to winning it without ever having to throw a punt.
So today, we are going to deconstruct the anatomy of intimidation. We're going to pull back the curtain on this whole system of postures and signals that people use, a lot of the time unconsciously, to seem bigger, stronger, and more dominant. And they do it by hijacking the most ancient parts of your brain. But here's the key insight, the thing you have to get. This isn't about personality. It's a performance. It's a script that someone is running. And today, you're going to learn how to read it.
All right, here's our roadmap. First, we'll frame intimidation as a performance, because until you see it as a script, you're just a character in their play. Then we'll talk about that feeling, the biological shrink. We'll dissect the anatomy of the bluff, the specific tactics they use. We're going to dive into the neurobiology that explains why this whole bluff works so well, and crucially, we'll lay out a protocol for reclaiming your own power before we wrap up with the one big principle that makes this entire system just collapse.
Okay, first up, the performance of power. The main idea here is that intimidation isn't some innate quality someone has. Nope, it's a learned physical performance. It's a silent war for what the source material calls the physical high ground. And this isn't just about being taller, it's about controlling the physical narrative of the entire interaction. Most of us don't even realize we're in this battle until we feel its effects, until we've already given up that high ground and we're left wondering, why do I feel so small right now?
And that brings us to a really central concept, the biological bluff. Think of it as a system of postures designed to trick your brain. It exploits this ancient hardwired connection, the size-status link. This is a primitive evolutionary assumption that's found all across the animal kingdom, and it says bigger equals more powerful, more important, more dangerous. So, an intimidating person isn't necessarily stronger. They're just better at performing the visuals of strength. This is the weapon we're about to take apart.
Now, the effect of that bluff is an experience I guarantee everyone has had. It's called the biological shrink. It's that universal, sinking feeling of being physically and cognitively just diminished in the presence of a dominant display. It's that moment, maybe in a tense meeting or a tough conversation, where you just feel your confidence evaporate. And it's not because of what was said, but because of how the other person is holding their body.
And this feeling, it breaks down into really specific physiological symptoms. Your voice, which was firm a second ago, gets quieter. Your posture collapses inward, your shoulders round, almost like you're trying to protect yourself. Your heart rate spikes, pumping adrenaline for a fight or flight that never actually happens. And then comes the worst part, the cognitive fog, that incredibly frustrating inability to think clearly, to access your best arguments, or even just to get your thoughts out. The source calls this whole process the erosion of sovereignty, and it often results in submission under duress. You end up agreeing not because you want to, but because your body has decided survival is more important than winning the argument.
And right here, this is the crucial insight. The battle was never about the words being said. You haven't lost an argument on its merits. You have unconsciously accepted their predator frame. By letting them set the nonverbal terms of engagement, where they are the predator and you are the prey, the actual details of the discussion become totally irrelevant. Once you accept that frame, you've already lost. This is the leverage point. This is where control is truly won and lost.
So, how exactly do they build this frame? That brings us to the anatomy of the bluff. And this isn't just random aggressive behavior. No, it's a predictable, four-stage process of physical takeover. It's a systematic playbook. The source calls it the Expansion-Contraction Loop, a dynamic specifically designed to make one person physically expand while the other person is psychologically and physically forced to contract.
Okay, so the structure of this performance unfolds in 4 escalating stages. First, morphological expansion, which is all about physically taking up more space. Second, ventral dominance, to signal you're fearless. Third, height hijacking, to subconsciously set the pecking order. And finally, angular squaring, to imply a direct threat. Let's break down each step of this dominance ladder.
Stage 1 is morphological expansion. The classic example, the akimbo stance. Hands on hips, elbows flared way out. But it can also be spreading your papers all across a desk or draping an arm over the chair next to you. The goal here is to increase what the source calls your visual footprint. You just take up more space. And when you do that, you are running that ancient program that tricks an observer's brain into thinking you have a higher physical mass. It's the most basic bluff, the foundation of the whole thing.
Stage 2 is ventral dominance. Now this one is more subtle, but it is incredibly powerful. By exposing the vulnerable parts of your body, the throat and the chest, your whole front or ventral side, a person sends a really potent nonverbal signal. It says, I am so confident, I have zero fear of you. I don't even need to protect my vital organs. And this display of confident vulnerability makes the target by comparison feel way more exposed and way more in need of protection, which just makes them want to shrink.
Then we have stage 3, height hijacking. This is all about using vertical space to manipulate status. When someone stands over you while you're sitting, they force you to physically tilt your head up to look at them. I mean, that simple physical act triggers a deep primitive instinct called the hierarchy ranking heuristic. Your brain automatically equates their physical height with social rank and authority, and it puts you in a one-down position before a single word is even spoken.
And finally, we get to stage 4, angular squaring. This is where the trap really closes and the threat becomes much more direct. The person points their chin, their shoulders, and their feet squarely at you. In the natural world, this direct angular orientation is the final signal before an attack. So for our nervous system, it's a red alert. This posture creates this constant, low-level state of anxiety. It keeps you from relaxing because your body is reading it as a sign that a strike is coming at any second.
So, we've seen the how. We've broken down the specific physical tactics of the bluff. But now, let's pivot to the why. Why is this performance so devastatingly effective? This section is all about hijacking the primal brain, the neurobiology that makes this whole dynamic work.
Which brings us right to the central question, doesn't it? Why does your modern, logical, sophisticated brain fall for such a primitive physical trick? Well, the answer isn't in your conscious mind. It's buried deep within your evolutionary wiring.
The answer is something called the Predator-Prey Heuristic. This is one of the brain's oldest and most reliable survival shortcuts. For literally millions of years, a simple rule kept our ancestors alive. The creature that takes up the most space, looks the biggest, and acts the most confident is probably the most dangerous one. And your brain still runs that ancient software. It's efficient, for sure, but it's not always accurate. It treats a manager's squared-up shoulders with the same primal alarm it would a predator's bared teeth.
What this does is trigger an internal conflict right inside your head, a kind of neurological tug-of-war. On one side, you've got the amygdala, your brain's ancient threat detection center. It's the guard at the gate, and when it senses a threat, like a big figure looming over you, it just screams, danger, and triggers fight or flight. On the other side is your prefrontal cortex, the modern strategist in the war room, the home of logic and reason. But in a confrontation, that guard often overrules the strategist, slamming the logic gate shut to prioritize immediate survival.
And the source material gives this phenomenon a name: amygdala overdrive. That cognitive fog, that frustrating feeling of not being able to think straight, it's not a personal failing. It is a biological state. Your advanced, logical brain is literally being hijacked by your more powerful, more ancient survival instinct. And just recognizing that, that's the first step toward getting back in control.
Okay, so we've analyzed the problem. We totally get the performance. We understand the neurobiology. Now let's shift from just analyzing to actually applying. How do you counter this hijack? This section is all about reclaiming your sovereignty. It's a tactical protocol to shift your own state from prey back to anchor.
So here it is, a 4-step counter protocol. It's a clear process for breaking the spell. First, you're going to label the performance, and that re-engages your logic. Second, you use spatial leveling to take back your physical ground. Third, you adopt something called the bridge gaze to signal composure without being aggressive. And fourth, you use the occupancy breath to calm your nervous system from the inside out. Let's look at how to actually do each of these.
Okay, these steps are super practical. First, label. The moment you see the hands on the hips, you consciously think to yourself, okay, that's a visual expansion play. Just doing that simple act of noticing, it shifts you from being a character in the drama to an observer of it, and it re-engages your prefrontal cortex. Second, level the space. If they're standing, you stand up. If they lean in, you take a small step back. You physically refuse to be caged, and you break their height advantage. Third, the gaze. Now you don't get into a staring contest, that's a challenge, but you also don't look away, that's submission. Instead, you hold a calm, neutral gaze right on the bridge of their nose. It signals, I see you and I am not intimidated. And finally, breathe. Take a slow, deep breath into your stomach. This is a direct command to your nervous system, telling your own body there is no immediate threat. It lowers cortisol and lets you think clearly again.
And this all brings us to our final section, the ultimate takeaway. This is the core principle that once you really truly get it, allows you to collapse this entire system of intimidation. It's about becoming an anchor for reality in a sea of performance.
The single most powerful tool you have is this: awareness collapses this system. Intimidation is basically a magic trick. Its power lies entirely in the audience's ignorance of how it's done. The moment you see the mechanics, the hand on the hip, the lean in, the squaring of the shoulders, the moment you recognize it for the performance that it is, the illusion just shatters. You can't unsee it, and once you see it, it loses its power over you.
And so we end with this final thought, which is really the thesis of this whole explainer. The goal isn't to become a better performer of intimidation yourself. The goal is to refuse to play the game at all. Don't shrink for their performance, anchor for the reality. Be the calm, grounded presence in the room that sees the bluff for exactly what it is, and by simply refusing to react, reveals the truth of the situation.